Hello everybody, it's Nick here with Nick Tolman Music. Today we are going to continue our beginner guitar lesson series using Mel Bay's Modern Guitar Method, Grade 1. Okay, so today we are going to be looking at page 46. Page 46 has two exercises. The first one is called SOR's Waltz, and the second one is called Bluegrass Waltz. Both of these exercises are in the key of G, and they're both in 3/4 time. And as the names indicate, they're technically both waltzes. We're going to look at both of these exercises today, play them at a couple different tempos, and then walk through each of them, kind of identifying some of the problematic areas and things that you might watch out for, but also some techniques that you might use to help you be successful when learning these songs. So let's go ahead and get started. So starting out with SOR's Waltz, we're going to go ahead and start. I'm going to play this exercise for you at 72 beats per minute, which is definitely under tempo, but then we'll go ahead and do a walkthrough before we take that tempo up a little bit. So here we go. Here is SOR's Waltz at 72 on the metronome. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready and play. Alright, so there we go. That is SOR's Waltz at 72. Now let's go ahead and dive into this. We're going to go ahead and walk through it measure by measure and talk about what's happening, give you some ideas of things that you might try to help you be successful here. So starting off in the first measure, it really is just outlining a G chord. Okay, so you have a couple options. One is you could just set your G chord and... Now you'll find though that when you get into the second measure and kind of throughout this piece that there's this high D up on the B string. That happens a lot, okay? So your standard G fingering, G chord fingering is not going to include that. So you have a couple options there. First is you could do the alternate G chord fingering, which is going to be your second finger on the low G, your first finger on B, open, open, then you're gonna have your third finger here on D, and your fourth finger up here on G. And what's gonna end up happening is you're just gonna have that third finger kind of coming on and off as you go between like the B and the D. So that's one way you can do it. For me, I tend to just kind of play individual notes through most of these G runs. So I do something like this. Okay, and that tends to work fine for me. You have just some options there as far as how you want to approach that. So if you do take the way that I go, starting in the first measure, we're just playing the notes. Got that D with our third finger, jump down to the B with our second finger. And then when we get into this third measure, I do play that high G with my fourth finger because I'm already using my third finger. and then the F sharp with the second. So just like it says there, I think that fingering works just fine. Your other option would be for that high G, since you're already playing the D with your third finger, you could just lay that down and kind of bar across to get that high G. Either way is fine. I kind of like the fourth finger there for the high G. So third measure, we've got starting on that G. Good, in the fourth measure we have this E7 thing. It's just a G sharp and a D. Then we go to this A minor. So you have a couple options here. What I tend to do is just play the notes as they come, which is the A with your second finger and the C with your first finger. And then when that E happens, I do my third finger for that. So it is just an A minor chord, but I end up kind of doing it a little backwards. The other option is you can just hit your A minor chord. So as soon as you hit that E7 thing, you just go straight to an A minor chord. And that works just fine. Okay, and then moving into that last measure of the first line, we've got the A and the C. And just, okay, so for me, I like to play this measure, the A and the C, the A with my second finger and the C with my first finger, which leads me back to the measure before with that A minor. That's kind of why I like to do it that way rather than just using your standard A minor fingering, because otherwise there's going to be a finger change, right? So again, back in the fourth measure, we've got that A minor thing. If you do the A with your second finger, C with your first finger, then play that low E with your third finger, and then you're already set up for that D7. Your second finger is already where it needs to be. F sharp down with your fourth finger, and then moving into the first measure of the second line, we've got, and for me, so as soon as I play that F sharp, I'm just leaving my fourth finger down until I get to that little E minor stack. It's not labeled E minor, but it's just an E minor chord. E, G, B, that's just E minor. So that, again, that first measure, nothing too fancy, just leaving that fourth finger down for both of those F sharps. Moving in that second measure of the second line, we've got, that's all pretty straightforward. Third measure, just play the notes down. And then the fifth measure is just like the beginning. High G with my fourth finger in the first measure of the third line. And again, A with my second finger, C with my first finger. Third measure of the third line. This is all the same. Now it's going to change a little bit. So here's the fourth measure of the third line. Just play the notes. And that ends the third line. Okay, so as you go through that, really, most of it, you're just playing the notes down. There's nothing really that fancy that's happening. So the best way to practice is just to take it slow. So if these eighth note lines are kind of hanging you up, just take those nice and slow. And slowly build that up, and eventually that'll just get smoother and smoother, okay? All right, so in the fourth line, we move into this E minor situation. So I actually just, for this line, I just hit the E minor chord. Second finger on the B, low B here. Third finger on the E. And I start right there. So we start with the chord stack from E, G, and B. But we instantly go down to that low B, so it's good to have it ready. Just leave your E minor chord intact, and then I just move to an A minor chord, just standard A minor fingering. That whole measure, you can just leave it down, and then I go to an open B, And during that open B, I set up my B7 chord. Again, you can just leave your B7 chord fingering for that whole measure. And then here for this next measure, it is E minor. However, don't get too hasty about going straight to your whole E minor chord finger because you are going to need to play that low G. So what I do is I start with my open G, play the low G, then go to the B, and leave it. Now I'm into my full E minor fingering, which I leave for the rest of that measure and the next measure. Okay, so let me just do that for you slowly so you can see. So this is the fourth measure of the fourth line. And then that last note I play with my fourth finger. One more time. Now the E minor chord is there. Hit that D with my fourth finger, and it's just like that. Not too challenging, just kind of being aware that that measure, the first three measures of that line, you can just hit those chords and hold those chord shapes the whole time. The last two measures, you have to kind of build into that E minor and then hold it the rest of the time. Okay, so the fifth line, we move into this A7. So I just played that D with my fourth finger. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the C sharp with my third finger, the A with my second finger. Okay? For me, this fingering is really important, and this is one of the probably the trickiest spot in the whole thing, okay? So coming again out of that D that we just played with our fourth finger, now we're going to drop our second and third finger down on A and C sharp, and I'm going to leave those down. Play the open E, play the high G with my fourth finger, go back to this C sharp, play the D with my fourth finger, and now I can shift and play that high F sharp either with my second finger or my third finger. I like my second finger. Okay, so here's what that looks like slowly. So this is the first two measures of the fifth line. We just played that high D with our fourth finger, and then we go into the first measure of the fifth line. Okay, now I'm going to do the measure before. So I'm going to actually start on the last measure of the fourth line and go into it so you can see. So I've got my E minor chord built here. Right into that A minor chord. Okay? So that is that. Again, to me, that's the trickiest spot in this entire piece. It's just the fingerings just get a little awkward. So just take your time and go slow, and rewind that little example as many times as you need to just get your fingers going in the right place. So third measure of the fifth line, we start with that A minor stack, playing the eighth notes down, and now in the fourth measure, it's just like the beginning again. High G with my fourth finger. This is all the same. Now this changes a little bit. So fourth measure of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sixth line, fourth measure of the sixth line, it changes. So we've got that G and B, F sharp, just watch out for this D sharp, and then we've got the A minor. You don't necessarily need to set up the whole E minor chord because you're just playing that stack. So for me, I just played that low E with my second finger, open D, and then moving into this last measure of the sixth line, and then the first measure of the last line. All of that is just a G chord. Again, if you want to set a chord to leave for this one, you can, but it's going to be that alternate fingering G chord with your second finger on the low D. That way you can get your D in here with your third finger. So again, that fingering, if you want to set it, you got your low G with your second finger, B with your first finger, you've got 2 open strings, D and G, then you've got your D here with your third finger and G with your fourth finger. With that setup, this measure, you can just and go straight into your C chord. Or you can play individual notes, which is how I did it in the example. So the C chord measure, back to G, D7, and that's the end. All right. It's really a nice little exercise and a fun song to play, but it can be a little bit challenging, and technically it's a waltz. So really a waltz tempo would be like bum 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 like a lot faster than that, okay? Don't feel like you have to get to that tempo, but that's maybe your goal, is to kind of like build up and play that at a faster tempo. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the next exercise here, which is Bluegrass Waltz. We're gonna go ahead and start the metronome again at 72, and we'll see how this goes. So here we go. I'm gonna play and then we'll talk about it. So here it is at 72. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready and play. And there is Bluegrass Waltz. This exercise is actually much easier to play than SOR's Waltz, mainly because it really utilizes just standard chord fingerings. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Starting in the first measure, really that's just a G chord, and even for me, I think the best approach is just to start with your G chord set. Okay? And that's all there is to it. Now what's gonna happen here is I'm gonna go ahead and just move my fourth finger down to the D, and just for that one note. So starting again at the beginning, it looks like this. Open strings and C chord. I'm just gonna set the whole C chord. Walk all the way up, and then I'm going to play this high G with my fourth finger, F sharp with my second finger, back to a C chord. You don't necessarily have to set the whole C chord because you're just strumming those top 3 notes, so really you just need your first finger. And back to G. Again, I think I like best, I think when I played it, I naturally went to that D with my third finger and then played the low G with my second finger, which works just fine for this. So you can do that. So starting in the fourth measure of the top line here, play the G with our fourth, F sharp, C stack, and then what I'm saying is, yeah, D with your third finger, then go for the low G with your second, B with your first, open the strings back to walking up back up to D with your third finger. That's how I played it. You can do it that way. The other option would be to on the first note of this last measure of the first line, to just play that high D with your fourth finger, and then you can go to that low G with your third, which you might be more comfortable doing since you're usually playing that note with your third finger anyway. But then that would require you to be kind of ready to go to play that next D, the first measure of the second line, with your fourth finger as well. Either one of those options is just fine. I'm going to go ahead and play both options for you here slowly so you can see. So this is the way that I played it, starting in the fourth measure of the first line. Okay, so then your other option would be this. Either one of those options will work just fine. So moving into the second measure of the second line. Just playing the notes down, third measure. Playing it down, and then this is just like the beginning, so back to a G chord. So your D here with your fourth finger, and then I'm going to move my third finger up to play this F. Okay, so those last two measures of the second line look like this. Then moving into the first measure of the last line, we've got our C chord, high G with the fourth finger, F sharp, C stack, and G chord, standard G chord. And that's all there is to it. All right, let's go ahead and take the tempo up on this one a little bit. So here it is at 120 on the metronome. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready, and. And there it is at 120. Thank you so much for tuning into our lesson today. If you haven't already checked out my website at www.nicktolmanmusic.com, please check it out. There are more resources on there to help you out as you are learning guitar. If you haven't subscribed, please do, and we will see you next time. Thanks.